snow slammed against the cabin walls like 1,000 tiny fists. The wind howled through the cracks, rattling the shutters, making the small oil lamp flicker. John sat at his wooden table, repairing a broken tool with cold, stiff fingers. The cabin was quiet except for the sound of the storm outside. His rifle leaned against the wall, always within reach. On this frozen planet, you never knew what might come crawling out of the dark. The clock showed 3 in the morning when he heard it, soft, uneven scratching at the door. His head shot up. No one ever came here. Not in this weather. Not at this hour. The sound came again, slower this time, like someone too weak to knock. John stood, reached for the rifle, and moved toward the door. His boots creaked on the old floorboards. The air felt colder, heavier, as if the storm itself was pressing against the cabin. He unlocked the door and pulled it open just enough to see. Snowflakes swirled inside, clinging to his hair and coat. A small figure stood there, shivering violently. She was pale, skin almost the color of ice, and her lips trembled with each shallow breath. Her eyes, wide and glassy, locked on his. She swayed forward as if her legs could no longer hold her. Before he could speak, her voice came out in a broken whisper, strange yet clear. I can cook, bear your children. Just don't throw me out." The words were so sudden, so out of place, that John froze. He almost thought he'd misheard her, but before he could react, her knees buckled and she collapsed into the snow at his feet. Instinct took over. He pushed the door open wide, dragging her inside. She was lighter than he expected, her body weak and cold as stone. The snow on her clothes began to melt, soaking into the wooden floor. He kicked the door shut and bolted it, throwing an extra log into the fire. Her clothes were torn, the fabric thin and stiff with frozen blood. Strange symbols were stitched into the sleeves, ones John recognized. They belonged to one of the alien warrior clans, the kind that hated humans. He had seen those markings before, back when he still served as a mechanic for the defense forces. They were trouble. John laid her near the fire, wrapping an old blanket around her shoulders. Her skin was icy, her breathing shallow. He took a closer look at her hands. They were bluish at the fingertips, frostbite already setting in. If he didn't warm her soon, she wouldn't make it until sunrise. She stirred slightly, her eyes half opening. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Please, don't let them take me." Her gaze darted toward the door as if she expected it to burst open at any moment. Then her eyes rolled back, and she went still. John sat back, his mind racing. Who was she running from? Why would someone from her clan come to a human for help? And why offer that the moment she saw him? He didn't have answers, only more questions. Outside, the wind screamed louder, masking any sound that might come from the forest. But in the back of his mind, he thought he heard something else, a faint crunching in the snow, too steady to be the storm. Someone, or something, might already be out there. He stood and checked the door again, making sure the locks were secure. Then he went to the window and wiped away the frost with his sleeve. Darkness. Endless white. No movement. Still, the feeling wouldn't leave him. Turning back to the fire, he saw the woman curled up in the blanket, her breathing a little stronger now. A few strands of her hair, white, almost blending into the snow, clung to her damp face. Her alien features were sharper than a human's, her cheekbones high, her ears faintly pointed. She looked young, but there was a weariness in her expression, even unconscious, as if she had been running for a long time. John sighed, pouring some hot water from the kettle into a tin cup. He didn't know if her species drank tea, but she would need something warm when she woke. He set the cup beside her and pulled a chair closer to the fire. He kept the rifle across his knees, eyes flicking between her and the door. Hours passed in slow silence. The storm outside showed no sign of stopping. Now and then, she shivered under the blanket, mumbling words he couldn't understand. Once, she gripped the edge of the blanket like a lifeline and whispered something about a war chief and blood debt. As the first pale light of dawn seeped through the frost-covered windows, she opened her eyes again. They were a deep, striking silver, reflecting the fire's glow. She looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing whether to speak. "You shouldn't have let me in," she said softly. "They'll kill you for it." John leaned forward. "Who's they?" She hesitated, her lips parting, but then she glanced toward the door again, her face tightening with fear. "If I tell you, you'll throw me out." He studied her for a long moment, the firelight flickering between them. You showed up at my door in the middle of the night, half dead, and offered me, well, let's just say, unusual things. You don't strike me as someone with many options. A faint smile touched her lips for the first time, though it didn't reach her eyes. You're right. I have none. That's why I came to you. A human. John didn't know whether to be insulted or curious, but he knew one thing for certain. Whatever danger she carried with her was already outside in the snow. And now it was his problem, too. The storm had calmed by morning, but the cold still pressed in through the walls. The snow outside was deep, covering the ground in a thick white sheet. John sat at the table, sharpening his knife while keeping one eye on the alien woman lying near the fire. Her breathing was steadier now, her face no longer as pale, but she still looked weak. When she finally stirred, she jolted upright, her eyes wide, scanning the small cabin as if she'd woken in a prison. The blanket slipped from her shoulders, and she tried to stand, but her legs gave out instantly. John was beside her in 2 steps, steadying her before she hit the floor. She pulled away from his touch as if expecting him to hurt her, then tried crawling toward the door. You won't last 10 minutes out there, John said, blocking her path. Sit down before you freeze again. Her breathing was fast, her silver eyes sharp with suspicion. Where am I? She asked in a low voice. My cabin, he replied. You collapsed at my door last night. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then her shoulders sagged, and she sat back down. I can't stay, she muttered. Why not? They'll find me. He studied her face, the way her jaw tightened as she said it. Who? She hesitated, as though speaking the truth might summon them. My clan, she said finally. I'm not supposed to be here, not with you, not with any human. John leaned against the table, crossing his arms. Your clan doesn't sound friendly. They kill traitors, she said simply. Her gaze flicked toward the window, where the pale light of day struggled through the frost. And they call me that now. What did you do? I refused to marry our war chief, she said, her voice trembling, not with cold, but with anger. He is cruel. He kills for sport. My people think it's strength. I think it's madness. She looked at him directly for the first time. No one refuses him. No one lives after refusing him. John felt a strange mix of pity and caution. She was trouble. He could see that much. Trouble had a way of spreading to everyone around it. He went to the window and looked outside. The snow was untouched, stretching toward the tree line, but something felt wrong. He stepped closer, squinting. There, half buried in the snow, was a trail of deep clawed footprints leading toward the forest. They were too large to belong to her. He called her over. She limped to the window, took one look at the tracks, and her face went pale. They're here, she whispered. You think these are your people? They use trackers, she said, voice low and urgent. Beasts that follow scent. If they've been here, they'll come back with warriors. John frowned. So if I let you stay, I'm painting a target on my back. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Yes, and if you send me out, I'll die before nightfall. She wasn't begging. Not exactly. Her voice carried the weight of someone who already expected the worst. John looked at her torn clothes, the faint frostbite on her fingers, the bloodstains on her sleeves. He thought of the storm last night and the way she had spoken at the door, desperate and ready to trade anything for shelter. You said something strange when you first arrived, he said slowly, about cooking and children. Her eyes flickered with shame. I needed you to let me in, she said. I said what I thought you'd want to hear. She glanced at him, her voice softer. But I can cook, and I can help. I'm not useless. John didn't answer right away. He turned from the window and went to the fireplace, throwing in more wood. The cabin grew warmer, but the unease in his chest didn't fade. The day passed slowly. She sat at the table, wrapped in the blanket, watching the flames. He noticed the way her gaze shifted every time the wind blew against the walls. She was listening for something. Once, when he stepped outside to check the shed, he found another set of prints near the corner of the cabin. Lighter than the claw marks, more like boots. They hadn't been there earlier. He followed them a few steps into the trees before they disappeared into the fresh snow. When he returned inside, she was on her feet, trying to find a pot from his shelves. I'll make food, she said quickly, as if afraid he would send her away if she wasn't useful. You should rest. I can't, she said. If I stop moving, I start thinking. He let her try, though it was clear she didn't know much about human food. She poured too much salt, burned the first pan, and cut herself slicing vegetables. But she didn't complain. Later, as they ate, she kept glancing toward the door. If they come, you should let them take me, she said suddenly. That's not how I work, John replied. You don't understand, she insisted. They won't just kill you. They'll make an example of you. Humans are already seen as weak. Protecting me will make you a target for every clan warrior in this sector. John met her eyes. Then they'll find out humans aren't as weak as they think. For a moment, she looked like she might argue, but then her expression softened. You're stubborn, she said quietly. I don't know if that will save you or get you killed. That night, as the wind began to pick up again, John loaded his rifle and set it beside his bed. The strange tracks outside lingered in his mind. Something was out there, waiting. In the dark, he heard her shifting on the floor near the fire. Her voice came softly through the shadows. Thank you for not throwing me out. He didn't answer. He lay awake, listening to the wind and the faint sound of something moving through the snow outside. She sat at the table in the dim light, her silver eyes watching him as if measuring his every move. The blanket still wrapped around her shoulders, but now she sat straighter, a little more sure of herself. I can stay, she said slowly, if I earn my place. I can cook for you, clean, help you survive this winter. In return, you don't give me to them. John leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. That's not how this works. I don't need a servant. Her jaw tightened. I'm not asking to be one. I'm saying I'll work for my keep. If you see me as useful, maybe you'll think twice before throwing me outside. He didn't answer right away, but his silence seemed to be enough for her. She got up and went to the shelves, picking through what little food he had. She tried to cook, but the first thing she put on the stove burned almost instantly. She muttered something under her breath, scraped the blackened part away, and started again. John found himself watching her, not because she was good at it, she clearly wasn't, but because she kept trying. The air smelled faintly of smoke and strange spices she'd taken from her own torn pouch. By the time she set the food on the table, it looked odd, but edible. He tasted it cautiously. Too salty, a little bitter, but warm. After weeks of eating the same plain stew, it was at least different. Not bad, he said, surprising himself. Her lips curved into the smallest smile, and for the first time since she arrived, she looked less like a hunted animal. But the moment didn't last. A low sound broke the silence, a growl, deep and wet, coming from outside the cabin. They both froze. John stood, motioning her to stay quiet. He grabbed his rifle from the wall and moved to the window. Snow swirled outside, thick and heavy, but through it he saw a shadow moving. Large. Slow. Something scraped along the cabin wall, followed by another growl. She rose from her chair and stepped toward him, her voice barely a whisper. It's one of their trackers. The shadow shifted again, closer this time, and then a sudden thud shook the door. The wooden frame groaned under the impact. John moved quickly, sliding the heavy bar across the door. Get behind me. Her breath was fast and uneven, but she did as he said, crouching near the table. The scratching at the door turned into loud, heavy thumps. The wood splintered slightly. Stay low, he said, raising the rifle. The door shook again, harder this time, and then a sharp cracking sound came from the corner of the window frame. A clawed paw, bigger than his hand, slid through the gap, trying to pull it open. John fired without hesitation. The blast echoed through the cabin, and a screech of pain cut through the storm. The paw jerked back, leaving deep gouges in the wood. Snow sprayed against the glass as the creature retreated. John moved to the door and listened. Heavy footfalls thudded into the distance, then faded. When he turned, she was staring at him, wide-eyed. You stood against it without fear. I'm still here, aren't I? He said, setting the rifle down to reload. She shook her head slowly. You don't understand. Those beasts are used to terrify even trained fighters, and you fought it like it was nothing. He shrugged. It wasn't nothing, but it wasn't enough to make me run. Her eyes softened, and for the first time, she looked almost relieved. Maybe I chose the right door to knock on. They sat in silence for a while after that. The fire crackled, filling the quiet space between them. But John knew it was only the beginning. If the tracker had found them, warriors wouldn't be far behind. You said they'd kill me if they found you here, he said finally. Now I believe it. She lowered her gaze. I told you to give me up. You didn't. That means you're already in danger because of me. Danger's nothing new to me, he replied. Her lips pressed together as if she wanted to say more but didn't. Instead, she took the pot from the stove and began cleaning it. Her movements were slower now, almost careful, as if she was thinking about something important. That night, she didn't sleep right away. She sat near the fire, her knees drawn up to her chest, staring into the flames. John lay on his bed, eyes half closed, pretending to rest but listening to every sound. At one point, she spoke softly, almost to herself. If my clan finds me, I won't survive, but maybe, with you, I have a chance. He didn't respond. He wasn't sure what she expected from him, but he knew one thing. He'd already made the choice to keep her here, and choices had consequences. Somewhere outside, far in the distance, a horn sounded, a deep, echoing note that carried through the snowy night. She stiffened instantly, her hand tightening on the edge of the blanket. They've started searching, she whispered. John reached for his rifle again. The sound of the horn faded into the wind, but it left a weight in the air that neither of them could ignore. The cabin suddenly felt smaller, the walls thinner. Sleep didn't come easy for either of them. Every creak of the wood, every whistle of the wind sounded like footsteps in the snow. The morning was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that made the skin prickle. The snow outside had stopped falling, leaving the air still and heavy. John was fixing a broken hinge on the door when the silence broke. 3 sharp knocks, firm and deliberate. He froze, every muscle tense. Only someone who wasn't afraid of being heard would knock like that. He picked up his rifle from the table and motioned for her to stay out of sight. She moved quickly, crouching behind the stacked crates near the back wall. John opened the door just enough to see. 2 tall alien warriors stood in the snow, their armor dark and marked with the same symbols stitched into her torn clothes. Their eyes were cold, scanning the doorway like they were already picturing him dead. One of them spoke in deep, clipped voice. Human, we're looking for a runaway from our clan. Female, silver eyes, white hair. Have you seen her? John's grip on the rifle tightened, but his face stayed calm. No one's been here. The warrior's gaze flicked past him, toward the shadows inside. We tracked her to this area. Her scent ends near your home. Then you've got the wrong place, John said, his voice steady. You think I'd keep one of yours? I know what that means. The two exchanged a look. One stepped closer, his boots crunching in the snow. If you're lying, we'll come back, and you won't see us coming. John didn't blink. Then you'd better be sure. After a long, tense moment, they turned and walked away, their heavy steps fading into the distance. But before leaving the yard, one of them stopped, pulled a small blade from his belt, and carved a deep symbol into the wood of John's door, a jagged mark, like 2 crossed claws. John recognized it immediately. It was a warning, a promise of return. When they were gone, he shut the door and locked it. She came out from behind the crates, her face pale. That mark, it means they'll kill you next time. I figured, he said, checking the window to watch them disappear into the tree line. They didn't look like the forgiving type. Her eyes dropped to the floor. I should go. You've done enough. You've done enough. I won't bring more danger to you. Where will you go? He asked. She didn't answer, just moved toward the door, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. But when she reached for the latch, he blocked her path. You won't survive out there, he said firmly, and I'm not sending someone to their death. Her jaw trembled with frustration. You don't understand. They'll come back with more, and they'll bring fire. Then let them, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. I've faced worse than them. For a moment they stood there, eyes locked, neither willing to back down. Finally, she turned away, muttering something in her own language that he didn't catch. That night, the storm returned, trapping them inside. Snow piled against the door, and the wind howled through the cracks in the walls. With nowhere to go and nothing to do, they ended up sitting by the fire together. At first, they said little, but as the hours passed, she began to talk. She told him about her clan's endless wars, about the war chief she'd refused, and how she'd been hunted ever since. She spoke of the trackers, the beasts that had chased her through the forest for days, and how she'd barely escaped alive. John listened without interrupting, his eyes fixed on the flames. Her words painted a picture of a life where trust was rare and survival depended on fear. In return, he told her about his own past, about the ship that had crashed here, the crew that hadn't made it, and the long months of living alone in this frozen wilderness. By the second day of the storm, the cabin no longer felt like two strangers sharing a space. She began helping without being asked, repairing a torn sleeve on his coat, cooking small meals with what little they had. Her movements grew less tense, her voice less guarded. But the danger outside didn't fade. Every so often, John would check the door, the carved mark still fresh and dark against the wood. It was a reminder that the quiet wouldn't last forever. On the third night, as the wind roared outside, she sat close to the fire, her silver eyes reflecting the flames. "They won't stop," she said softly. "They'll come when the storm clears." "Then we'll be ready," he replied. She looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to read the truth in his face. Then, almost reluctantly, she nodded. The storm kept them trapped for one more day, the walls shaking with every blast of wind. But in that time, something unspoken settled between them, a silent agreement that whatever came next, they'd face it together. The storm finally broke on the fifth morning, leaving the world outside silent and white. Sunlight reflected off the snow so brightly it hurt the eyes. John stepped out to check for tracks and found the snow clean, no sign of the warriors from before. But his relief didn't last long. When he returned inside, she was sitting at the table, holding a small metallic object in her hands. It was no bigger than a coin, but it shimmered faintly in the light. "What's that?" he asked. She hesitated, then placed it on the table between them. "This is why they want me alive, and why they'll never stop." John picked it up carefully. It was light, smooth, and cold to the touch. Tiny etchings ran along the surface, symbols he couldn't read. "It's a data crystal," she explained. "It holds the war chief's plans. Not just my clan's plans, his plans for attacking human settlements across this sector. It's proof he intends to break the truce between our races." John stared at her. "You stole this from him?" Her gaze didn't waver. "I had to. If the humans don't know what's coming, they'll be wiped out before they can fight back." He set the crystal down slowly. "So you didn't just run from a marriage. You ran with his secrets." Her voice was low but steady. "That's why they sent hunters. That's why even my friends would betray me. The war chief will kill anyone who keeps me alive." John rubbed his temples. He'd thought she was just another desperate fugitive, but this was bigger, danger on a scale that could pull in every settlement for hundreds of miles. "If this is true, we have to get it to someone who can use it." "I know," she said, "but the moment we move, they'll know where we are. They have scouts everywhere." John stood, pacing. "Sitting here isn't an option either. You said they use trackers. They could already be on their way." She looked toward the window, where the sun was bright on the snow. "There's one more thing you should know. The data crystal has a signal, weak but constant. If they're close enough, they can follow it." He swore under his breath. "So we've been a beacon this whole time." She nodded. "It's only a matter of time before someone picks it up." The rest of the day passed in tense silence. She tried to distract herself by cooking, using the last of his dried meat and root vegetables. The smell of the stew filled the cabin, warm and heavy, but neither of them had much appetite. Every sound from outside, the crack of ice, the groan of the roof, made them glance toward the door. By nightfall, the sky had turned a deep violet, stars glittering in the cold air. John sat near the fire, cleaning his rifle. She sat opposite him, the blanket wrapped tight around her. "They'll come soon," she said. "When they do, you should give me to them." He didn't even look up. "We've already been through this. I'm not handing you over." "You don't understand what that means," she said, her voice sharper now. "If they kill you, it's on me." He finally looked at her. "If I send you out there, that's on me too. At least this way I can fight for you." Her lips trembled, but she didn't argue. Instead, she reached for the pot and poured him a bowl of stew. When she handed it to him, her fingers brushed his, and for the first time, he saw something in her eyes other than fear, something like trust. They ate in silence, but the quiet was broken by a faint sound outside. At first, it was so soft it could have been the wind, but then it came again, multiple footsteps crunching in the snow. John set his bowl down and stood, motioning for her to stay low. He moved to the window, peering into the dark. In the distance, faint torchlight bobbed between the trees, moving toward the cabin. "How many?" she whispered. "Too many," he replied, her hands clenched into fists. "If they take me, they'll get the crystal back. The humans won't know about the attack. Your people will die." "Then we make sure they don't take you," he said, checking the rifle's chamber. Her gaze was fixed on the torchlight, now closer. "You're willing to die for someone you met only days ago. Why?" He didn't answer right away. He pulled his coat on, adjusted the strap of the rifle, and finally looked at her. "Because once you opened that door last night, you stopped being a stranger." The torches were getting closer, the flickering light reflecting off the snow. She looked at him, her silver eyes burning with something fierce. "Then I'll fight with you." He almost told her to stay inside, but the determination on her face made him think twice. He signed, "But you follow my lead. If I tell you to run, you run." She nodded once. Agreed. The two of them stood together near the door, weapons ready, listening to the slow approach of the enemy. Outside, the torchlight swayed, shadows dancing on the snow. The night air felt heavy, charged, as if the first clash was only seconds away. The torches stopped moving when they reached the edge of the clearing. Shadows shifted in the darkness, the shapes of tall figures with weapons in their hands. John could hear low voices speaking in a language he didn't understand, but the tone was enough to know they were planning something. The air was so still, he could hear the faint crackle of the flames outside. He checked his rifle again, feeling the weight of it in his hands. Beside him, she gripped a short, curved blade she had taken from her torn belt. Her shoulders were tense, but her eyes were steady. "They'll try to surround us," she whispered. "Then we make sure they can't," he replied. They waited until the first warrior stepped forward. His armor gleamed faintly under the torchlight, the jagged clan mark painted across his chest. He called out in a booming voice, demanding John hand her over. His words were clear enough despite the language barrier. Surrender or die. John didn't move from the doorway. "Not happening," he said. The warrior took another step, and then the rest of them began to spread out, moving through the snow like hunters closing in on prey. John raised the rifle and fired the first shot. The crack shattered the silence, and the nearest torch fell into the snow. The attackers roared and charged. John stepped back into the cabin, forcing them to funnel through the narrow entrance. One came at the door, swinging a heavy blade, but John shot him before he crossed the threshold. Another leaped toward the window, trying to smash through, but she was ready. Her blade flashed, catching him in the arm and forcing him back into the snow. The sound of the fight was deafening. Gunshots, the clash of metal, shouts and screams. Snow sprayed into the air as more of them rushed forward. John moved fast, reloading whenever he could, his breath fogging in the freezing air. One attacker managed to break through the door, knocking John to the floor. The warrior raised his weapon, but before he could strike, she slammed into him from the side, driving her blade into his chest. He fell heavily, the weapon slipping from his grip. She grabbed it and tossed it to John, who caught it just as another came through the doorway. They fought side by side, their movements quick and desperate. She blocked an overhead strike aimed at him, and he shot an attacker trying to flank her. Blood stained the snow at their feet, steaming in the cold. After what felt like hours but was only minutes, the attackers began to retreat. Two dragged away their wounded, while the rest melted into the shadows of the forest. The torchlight faded, leaving only the sound of heavy breathing and the crackle of the fire inside. John lowered his weapon slowly, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. "They'll be back," he said. She was breathing hard, her blade still in her hand. "Not tonight. They lost too many." He glanced at her, noting the smear of blood on her cheek. Not hers, but from one of the warriors she'd fought. "You can handle yourself," he said. She gave a small, tired smile. "I told you I'm not useless." When they stepped back inside, the heat from the fire hit them both, but John could feel the ache settling into his muscles. He sat heavily on the chair, pulling off his gloves to check his hands. The skin on his knuckles was raw from gripping the rifle so hard. She knelt beside him, her eyes scanning for injuries. "You're hurt," she said, pointing to a shallow cut on his arm. "It's nothing," he replied, but she was already moving to the shelf to grab a strip of cloth. She cleaned the cut with water warmed by the fire, her touch careful but firm. "You fight like someone who's used to it," she said as she tied the bandage. "Comes with the life I've had," he answered. When she finished, she sat back on her heels, looking at him in a way that made him uneasy, not because it was hostile, but because it wasn't. There was gratitude in her eyes, but also something heavier. "If you die protecting me, I won't live," she said quietly. "I'd follow you into death." He didn't know how to respond to that, so he didn't try. He just leaned back, letting the warmth from the fire wash over him. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and slow, covering the blood and footprints. The world looked peaceful, but John knew it was only a disguise. The hunters would regroup, and when they came back, it would be worse. For now, though, they had survived, and that meant they still had a chance to decide what came next. She sat near the fire, sharpening her blade, and he cleaned the rifle again, both of them silent but alert. In that silence, without saying it, they made another unspoken promise. When the next fight came, they'd face it the same way they had tonight, together. Days passed without another attack, but the air never felt safe. John checked the tree line every morning, looking for signs of movement. She did the same from the back of the cabin, scanning the snow for tracks. The bodies from the last fight had been taken away by the retreating warriors, but dark stains still marked the frozen ground where they fell. The weather began to change. The snowstorms grew weaker, the air a little less sharp on the skin. Spring would come soon, and with it, more movement through the forest. John knew that staying here meant waiting for the next attack, and the next one might not be so easy to fight off. One afternoon, while they were repairing a broken shutter, she spoke without looking at him. "We can't stay here. When the snow melts, they'll travel faster. We'll be trapped before we know it." He tightened the rope on the shutter and nodded slowly. "Then we move." Her eyes searched his. "Where?" "There's a human settlement a week's walk from here," he said. "If we can reach it, they can send this crystal to the right people." Her hand went instinctively to the pocket where she kept the data crystal, as if afraid it might vanish. "Humans won't welcome me," she said. "They'll see what I am before they hear what I've done." "Then they'll welcome you as my wife," he replied without thinking. Her head snapped toward him, surprise flickering in her eyes. "Wife? It's easier than explaining everything to people who ask too many questions," he said. But there was a faint smile on his lips. She didn't answer, but there was a small change in her expression, a softness he hadn't seen before. They spent the next day preparing. John packed what little food they had left, along with extra ammunition and blankets. She checked her blade, cleaned it, and tied it to her belt. The morning they left, the cabin stood quiet behind them, smoke curling from the chimney one last time. The journey was slow at first. The snow was still deep, and each step was heavy. At night, they slept in makeshift shelters, taking turns keeping watch. Twice, they spotted figures in the distance, but the hunters didn't come close. Whether it was luck or caution, John didn't know. On the sixth night, they saw the first faint glow of the settlement lights far ahead. Her pace slowed, her eyes fixed on the warm yellow flicker in the darkness. "Almost there," she whispered. By the time they reached the gates, the sun was rising. 2 guards stood at the entrance, rifles in hand. They looked at John first, then at her, their faces hardening at the sight of her alien features. Before they could speak, John stepped forward. "She's with me," he said firmly. "My wife." The guards exchanged a look, but said nothing more, letting them pass. Inside, the streets were lined with small wooden houses, smoke rising from chimneys. People paused to stare as they walked past, whispers following them. They reached an empty house on the edge of the settlement, a place John had stayed in once during a supply run months ago. Inside, it was dusty, but intact. He set down their packs and turned to her. "You're safe here," he said. She looked around the small room, her fingers trailing along the table. "Safe," she repeated softly, as if testing the word. For the first time since she arrived at his door, there was no fear in her eyes, only a quiet, cautious hope. She set her pack down and moved toward the small stove, glancing over her shoulder at him. "I can cook," she said, the corner of her mouth lifting in the faintest smile. He smiled back, remembering her first words on that frozen night. "And I'm not throwing you out." The scent of food soon filled the room, and for a little while, the world outside didn't matter. They ate together in silence, the fire warming the space between them. Somewhere beyond the settlement walls, danger still waited. But here, for now, they had something neither of them had known in a long time: peace.